Hello everyone, welcome to another National 5 maths lesson on surds and indices. Today what we're going to do is take a wee look at learning how to simplify a surd itself. So the last video lesson was about simplifying expressions by looking at like surds. This is looking at the surd itself and seeing if there's a simpler way of writing it. So the success criteria are put at the bottom here. What we're going to do is look at our square factors. So we're going to take a wee look at the number underneath the square root sign and see if we can find a square factor for it. We're going to then write the surd as a product. Product means to multiply, so as a multiplication of two surds, one of which is going to contain the square factor, and then write your answer in the required form. Okay, so that's the 3 steps that we're going to take a look at. So here we go, here's a couple of examples, right? Let's get stuck straight in. Let's have root 20 up first, right? Well, when we're doing this, what we need to do is find a square factor of 20. Right? Now, if you think of all of the factors of 20, remember we think in factor pairs, 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 3 is not a factor, 4 and 5, and that's it. 20 has 6 factors, 1, 2, 4, 5, 10 and 20, but which of those, there's only one of those that's a square number, 4, right? And that's, so what you need to do is when you see these numbers, you need to be thinking, right, what out of the list of square numbers, so beginning with 4, 9, 16, 25, 36 and so on, which of that list, what number of that list divides into the number under the square root sign? So you would look at square root 20 here and think, 4 divides into 20 and 4 is a square number, so I'm going to use that. Now the reason why we identify a square factor is going to become clear in the next line of working, because there's a neat little rule that we can use with surds, that any number, right, under the square root sign times another surd, so times another number under the square root sign, can be simplified to simply just those two numbers multiplied together. So to give you an example here, root 2 times root 3 would be the root of 6, right? Those two numbers just get multiplied together. Now, that rule works in reverse, right? Well, if I've got root 6 here, then I could split that up into a product and I could say, well, that's root 2 times root 3. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the exact same thing for root 20. And what we're going to do is we're going to write it, that was the second success criteria, we're going to write it as a product of two surds, so a multiplication. So what two numbers multiply to make 20, where one of them's a square number? We know that's 4 and 5. So we're going to straight away just write root 20 as the square root of 4 times the square root of 5. Okay? And we know from the rule that I've written at the top there that root 4 times root 5 gives us root 20. So we haven't changed things. The reason why it's really important one of these is a square number is because if you have a square number under a root sign, you can find the square root of it. So square root 5 is a surd. We can find the square root of it, but not exactly. Square root 4, however, is not a surd. Square root of 4 is 2. So we can finish this off by saying, well, that's just 2 root 5. And hence we've simplified the surd. So it's a really quick, snappy little process, but it takes, it just takes a bit of getting used to. And what you're really doing is you're looking for two numbers that multiply to make the number under the root sign, but one of them has to be a square number, so one of them has to be off this list. Right? So let's take square root of 32. Right? Now, if we look at my list of square numbers at the top there, which of those divides into 32? Well, I'm hoping you would look at 16 and say, well, 16 divides into 32. So we can rewrite square root of 32 as the square root of 16 times the square root of 2. Right? So that's the first step. And then we can tidy it up by saying, well, the square root of 16 is 4. 4 times root 2 is just 4 lots of root 2. right? Now what I want to do is I want to just take the opportunity to show you, what if you hadn't used root 16, right? Because sometimes more than one square number divides into the number under the root sign. So in this case, you could have went for the smaller number of 4. So we could have root 32 equal to, well, instead of root 16 times root 2, we could have gone down the line of having square root 4 times square root 8, because 4 times 8 makes 32 and 4 is a square number. So this would work. And what we would end up with is 2 root 8. Now you might do that for a number in the task that you're going to get set, and you might think, well, I've got that right, I've done everything Mr. White said, I've got my square root sign, I've got my square factor, I've got it written as a product of 2/3, and I've simplified the expression down by taking the square root of the square number. But you would, if you did this and come up with 2 root 8 and went and looked at the back of the book, the answer would be 4 root 2. So what's right? Well, 4 root 2 is right because it's its most simplest form. And the reason I know 4 root 2 is its simplest form rather than 2 root 8 is because if I think of the number 8, well, 8 itself has a square factor. 8 can be made up of 4 times 2, can't it? And 4 is a square factor. So a bit like, you know when you take the common factor in algebra, and if you don't identify the highest common factor, what's left in your bracket will still factorise again. This is very much like that. If you don't identify the biggest square factor, then what's left under the root sign will have a square factor. So what I would actually do is encourage you, you might not, some of these numbers will get quite big, and you might not spot the biggest square factor. So what I want you to do is have a strategy for dealing with that when you can't identify the biggest. Just identify a square factor, and then a bit like taking 2 or 3 steps to cancel down a fraction, you would just take 2 or 3 steps to simplify a third. So I would continue on with this, because I would look at this and say, oh, hang on, 8 can be divided by 4, so I must have to simplify again. And I would say, well, that's 2 times, and write root 8 as a product of 2 thirds. So we say root 4 times root 2. Alright? Well, square root of 4 is 2, so this now becomes 2 times 2 times root 2. Well, 2 2's are 4, so that's 4 root 2. Right? So you get the same answer as what we originally got. So there's no, you don't have to get the answer first time in one go. In fact, you know, for many numbers, you probably wouldn't. But what you should do is recognise and just take a wee look, right, what's left under the root sign, does it simplify again? If it simplifies again, that's not a problem. You just do what I've done in a little box here on the right hand side and just keep trying it. Okay, so not all is lost if you get that. Folk tend to get quite hung up on that quite a lot when they do this. They get a bit fed up that they don't identify the biggest square factor straight away. It's not a problem. You know, you don't have to be a superhero. You just maybe have to take 2 or 3 steps with it, and that's not a problem. Right, one more. This is the sort of thing I'm meaning. Take the square root of 240, for instance. Now you'd be doing blooming well to identify the biggest square number that goes into 240, right? You'd be doing very well to do that. You know, I would need to sit and think about that for a few minutes, you know, when doing it. But what you can do with this is you can break it down a bit like when you're cancelling down fractions and you don't identify the biggest number that divides into the numerator and denominator. You would maybe just start by dividing by 2. Just make the numbers a bit smaller, or dividing by 5 if you could make the numbers a bit smaller, so that you can get them within a range that you can work with. What I would do with square root 240 is, well, take a square number that you know must go into that. Take 4, for instance. We know 4 must go into 240 because 4 goes into 24. So straight away I'm just going to say that square root 240 is the same as root of 4 times, well, what will it be? It'll need to be the root of 60. Okay, so that now becomes 2 root 60. Right. But root 60, let's see if we think, is there any square factors that go into that? Well, 4, I suppose, goes into square root 60. 4, not square root 60, but 4 goes into 60. We know 4 goes into 60 15 times. 4 15s are 60. So I'm going to go for 2 times square root 4 times square root 60. Not 60. Square root 15. Rub that out. There we are. So let's finish this off. Well, square root 4 is 2, so this would be 2 times square root 15. 2 2s are 4, so it's 4 root 15. Okay. Now if you think of the number 15, let's check, does 15 have any square factors? 1 and 15, 3 and 5, none of them are square numbers, so that's us. We must have taken it as far as we can. So that's an example of a number. You would have to really take that in a few stages to get that right. And there's, as I say, there's absolutely no problem with that. So that's that's a short lesson there on how to simplify a surd. Hope you found that useful. Let me know how you got on, and if you need any help, drop me a wee email. Thanks very much.